Hello there. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. No matter where you're calling from, it's great to see you in today's session. For those of you who are back once again for the next installment of the Waybook Masterclass series, welcome back. It's great to see you. We are in part 7 of the 8-part Masterclass series, which will make entirely available to you after all are complete. And for those of you who are newly attending, welcome. You are at part 7 of 8. However, I would suggest this is perhaps the first thing to begin with. So you've come at the perfect time. For those of you who I've not had the pleasure of meeting yet, I am Mike. I'm one of the co-founders here at Waybook. And today we're focusing on how you can structure your knowledge in order to scale more efficiently, both now and long term into the future with your knowledge within your Waybook account. Now, this really is something that I'm so excited to discuss with everybody here today because the structure of your knowledge really is the backbone of your information. As we're building knowledge-centric cultures within your businesses using Waybook, we really need to be focusing on what lives where, what type of information should live in there, how we present it, and how we structure that for our teams to make sure that it can act as the single source of truth for your onboarding, for your training, and also for all of those repetitive questions and keeping everybody on the same page. And the reason why this is so important is because studies show that 20% of people's work week, this is an average office-based US team member, 20% of their work week is utilized searching for internal knowledge. So that might be trying to find an answer to a question that lives in a document somewhere, or finding those logo files, or discovering how we used to do things and what we should change. That's roughly 1 day a week. So structuring your knowledge makes it really easy in order for people to find information fast, enable you to provide the right access to the right people, and also enable you to then have this holistic view of where the knowledge lives within your organization. So when we get that right, when we get that strong structure within the knowledge, your team can move faster, they can train better, they can actually make sure that they're asking fewer repetitive questions, not because we're telling them not to ask, it's because they know the information really easily. And it also then empowers this knowledge-centric culture so people can contribute more to the product of your business being the knowledge, as well as whatever product or service you provide. So in today's session, we're going to be running through all of these fundamentals to make sure you have the best structure within there. And just before we begin, let's just have a quick look at Landon Layton, who is the COO of SponsorCloud. Now, SponsorCloud is a software business based in the US. And actually, by centralizing the structure or the knowledge within Waybook with a perfect structure, Landon actually found that he reduced his onboarding time by 90%, which is large by even our standards. So 90% reduction in onboarding time. He actually noticed a 75% increase in deal closure because people could access information fast. The consistency of operations were really strong. And it also meant that people were able to answer questions, work with the clients, and crucially iterate on how things were being done rather than being caught up in the minutiae of the admin of their work. He also centralized all of their documentation, which increased the accountability across his team. So in today's session, we're going to cover all of these elements. And if you've not been to one of our webinars before, we like to keep this as interactive and engaged as possible. So please feel free to message in the chat. Feel free to say hello and perhaps where you're calling from. On our side, we have the fantastic Elle and Diego, both from the Waybook team. And also, if you've got any thoughts or questions, put it in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll keep this as interactive as we possibly can. So in today's session, what we're going to be specifically looking at is the fundamentals of structuring your knowledge. So what do we need to bear in mind? What is the winning approach? So what is the headset that we recommend you to take when you're starting to structure out your Waybook? How we can start utilizing best practice, utilizing Waybook AI. And actually, once we've got a structure, how can we maintain that integrity? And again, when I'm saying structure, I'm really talking about where the knowledge lives and how people access it. So how can we make sure that we don't have to re-engineer and rethink this on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis, that it kind of stays strong as we move forward? And then we'll just look into some top tips to get you started. So Without further ado, let's just jump in by first looking at what are the building blocks that we're taking into account when we're thinking about structure. Now, this is relevant if you are day one within Waybook and you're about to build, or if you've got a Waybook that's cooking on gas and you're looking good and you're just looking to kind of optimize it a little bit more. Now, the context that we have here are the three separate parts that you can think about when you're creating your Waybook. Now, the first one is the structure itself. And when we say structure, we very much talk about all of your content in the left-hand side. We'll dive into this in much more detail today, but it's basically what is a subject, what is a document, how do you categorize it? And the reason why this is a key thing to look at is because ultimately here we're looking at matching the knowledge as it lives within the organization. This will make more sense when we look at the second part, which is the learning paths. Now, a learning path enables you to customize the order through the content for specific individuals, users, groups, and roles. So where this relates to structure is we don't need to worry about an onboarding flow. We don't need to worry about when do we want people to see things and what should go above others, because we let the learning paths do that heavy lifting. And the third building block of building your Waybook is the group permissions. So this is where we specifically match the knowledge that we have within our Waybook with the team members and the roles that we have within the organization. And once again, we don't have to structure our Waybook based on an individual or a team, or sometimes not even a department. We want to look at the knowledge from how it lives divisionally within the business. And then we use the group permissions to make sure that the right people have the right access and the right control over the relevant information. Now, I'm sharing you these three key things because today we are just focusing specifically on structure. However, we also have a separate masterclass focusing on both permissions and also learning paths as well. But back to today's programming of structure. Now, as I mentioned, a structure basically has the integrity, the backbone of your Waybook. And that comes in 4 different tiers. The top tier is your category. And a category is essentially your group of content. So you can think of this as your very broad divisions within the business. Now, if you're a business that kind of has 10 to, let's say, 20 people, you might actually just have one category. Every Waybook account when you start literally just has one category called library. And we actually recommend that you come to create your categories afterwards. So don't worry about these now, but the category is the top grouping. The second thing is your folders. And a folder is almost, your subjects, which are essentially your folders of documentation. Now, your folders can either be departmental clusters of content. So that might be your sales handbook, your marketing handbook, or knowledge that runs across the business. And you may already have a folder structure that is working for you, perhaps in your SharePoint, your Google Drive, or even just on your own desktop. Then within each subject, we have a series of documents. So the document within Waybook is similar to how you might have a document on your computer. It is an individual procedure, an individual policy, a piece of information, or a how-to. And then within each document, we have a series of steps, which is pretty much the individual actions and insights within the Waybook, within that Waybook document. Now, I'm going to jump in and out of this account to kind of make sure we have a full context of what this looks like. And again, I'm just going to repeat those 4 tiers and show you where they live within this Waybook. So this broad level, top level section here is a category. This category are our top clusters of information. You might have one called library if you've just started your Waybook account. But here you can see we've got welcome documents, which is a grouping of information. We've got sales and marketing, which is a division, HR and training, another division, and management, which is almost like a broader cluster of content. Now, yours might look very different, but as I mentioned before, you come back to these categories after you've created the subjects. Now, the subjects are the folders of information. You almost want to think about these as either your departments, like the sales, the marketing, the customer support, or the knowledge that runs across the business, like your company messaging, your HR policies, your welcome documents. Now, most of your permissions will be set on a subject basis. So you almost want to think about who lives where and what do they need to know. And you can create that to match the kind of high level view of your knowledge. And then that final step on the left-hand side are the documents. So each subject has a series of documents. And this is really where we want to think about what do we want to share. So within the sales handbook, what do people need to know? What are the questions that people ask most commonly? What are the activities they need to do? So that might be lead generation. It might be how we do sales calls. It might be how we handle objections. What is our follow-up procedure? If we look in the HR policies, then that might be the individual policy. So how we do grievances, how we look at standards of conduct, how you raise an issue to HR. And then again, if we're looking at the welcome documents, it might be the purpose and background, the company history, the team, things like that. Now, the final layer that I mentioned are those steps. And the steps are essentially within a document. So I can even close our structure here. And within a document, instead of it being a long form PowerPoint, PDF, or Word doc, where we can get lost in all of the details within a document, we can essentially group that into digestible chunks, which ultimately means that we can really get up to speed. It works very well for grouping content, so people are easier to access, they can search this, but also it means that your tracking and your your tracking and reporting is on a per step basis, which ultimately means that you can make sure you know exactly who sees what. If you make a change, only one step will get changed rather than requiring people to read the equivalent of a 40-page PDF. It's just one snapshot of the information that has changed. So these are your 4 levels that we talk about when we're talking about structure. And again, in this masterclass, we're not looking at the specific content within the documents, but we are looking at the categories, subjects, documents, and steps. So now let's go one layer deeper. Let's say we understand what all of these elements are, and we just want to look at how we approach this. How do you start from scratch? What mindset do we need to be in? Now, the key thing here is that we highly, highly recommend you to start simple. It's much easier for you to split a document into 2 different documents or perhaps create a new subject than it is to actually condense information down. And we also sometimes see if we create 1,000 documents because in the future we want to have a piece of policy or SOP for every different eventuality in the business, we end up then just being overwhelmed with all of the knowledge that we want to create. And it's not the best experience for your readers as well if there's lots of unnecessary information. So start as simple as possible. What are the core areas of information within the business? And then we can actually expand that as we need. Now, when you're looking at those subjects, you almost want to consider those as your organizational areas instead of specific people or those specific roles. So as we've seen in that example there, it might be your marketing, your sales, your HR, your operations. And again, you may then end up breaking down your marketing subject into perhaps social media marketing or ads or brand guidelines. But I highly recommend, in order to start simple, we have a core subject for your main divisions within the business. Now, what we always recommend is to start from a document first perspective. So almost no matter where you're putting it, think about a document as what knowledge do you want to share? Now, that might be a core procedure. So how do we schedule an email campaign in HubSpot? That might be a procedure that we want to show someone on a step-by-step basis. And that's a great title for a document. Now, when we're looking at steps, you want to make sure that that is digestible as possible within those chunks of information. So we recommend that each page is almost half a page of letter paper. So if you were to print it out, it's about half a page. And of course, you can have images and videos and checkbox and files and everything, which you can explore a lot more either in Waybook or in the Content Masterclass. Now, later on, you can then organize that into categories as required, and that's where you can group things back into your divisions. So in order to do that, let's just kind of jump into this Waybook account again. And I'm just going to head over into our edit mode. So when I go into edit mode, you'll see that we're exactly seeing how this lives and what it works. But you'll notice if I hover over either a subject or a category or a document, we end up with these kind of dashes on the left-hand side. And this is just your drag handle. So if I want to take that purpose and background document from this subject into the next, of course, you just drag it, and then that will kind of amend that. So if we're looking at the marketing documents or the sales documents, and let's say, for example, there are some parts of the sales documentation that we don't necessarily want everybody in sales to see, or the division has grown, we might essentially create another separate sales handbook that might be kind of enterprise sales. We might have a different set of processes, procedures, or policies. So you can see here that I can head over to Add New, and I can choose whether to create a new document, a subject, or a category. And if I create a new subject, I can decide what category it lives in. I can create the title, let's say Enterprise Sales. And if I create that subject, it will then just go into that left-hand side for me to then add those documents. Now, I'm going to just delete that because the way that I actually like to create subjects and documents in a very easy way is, instead of clicking Add New, you can almost just hover over the level above. So if I'm hovering over the sales and marketing category, you have these quick add icons. So here I will quick add a subject. So I can then quick add that and create enterprise sales. And then when I'm in this subject, I can now quick add a new document. So this might be enterprise sales discounts, for example. So that is a very easy way for you to be able to segment out a subject. And of course, you can then decide, well, actually, that should live within this document, this subject here. And really what I'm trying to demonstrate here is actually we don't have to have the perfect subject and structure to begin with. As long as we've loosely got the right documents grouped, then we can kind of amend this and split this out. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the permissions are largely based on a subject level. So this is covered in a lot more detail within our masterclass. But if I head into the groups, we can basically say, okay, for our customer service department, we want them to be able to see these 8 different subjects. So we can decide, should they read it? Should they edit it? Should they publish it? Which basically means if I'm dragging and dropping a document into another subject, or creating a new document into, let's say, that welcome to Studio 6, that will automatically inherit all of the permissions that is set at that subject level. So we don't need to keep on rethinking who should have access to what. We just grow the business knowledge in the relevant areas, and the relevant people get updated. However, you can also create a permissions on a document basis. So whilst this is set on the subject, if I click this icon here, I can then actually decide to either increase or decrease that permission on that specific document basis. Now, I'm showing that just to show the power of having a good structure within your subjects, because it ultimately means that you can set this up once and continue to grow with the business. So these are some of the fundamentals of creating your structure. As you hover over the individual documents, you can now also see we have this 3-dot icon, and that's where we can move the document, we can duplicate it, we can rename it, we can do whatever we want, delete or archive. And similar, if we head into a specific document, on each individual step, that's where we can kind of move that, hide that, look at the revisions, or delete that individual step. So at each layer of your structure, you have all of the relevant controls to make sure that you can do whatever you need to do with that piece of content. Okay, so that is your fundamental approach. As a quick recap on that, really think about the high-level divisions from a subject basis. So your sales, your marketing, your customer service, your manufacturing, whatever divisions you have. And then think about those core documents within it. What are the core policies, procedures, processes, or pieces of information people should know? And you can just create that individual document. Now, the other thing to mention, and once again, I am keeping my eyes on the chat here, so if anybody has any other thoughts or questions, please do let me know. So of course you can go in and you can quick add those documents, and you can relatively quickly build out a structure that works for you. But if you just don't want to do that from scratch, that's absolutely fine, because you can have a very fast start utilizing our best practice based on the Waybook AI system. So to use that best practice, you can literally describe your business to Waybook, describe the focus areas, the number of team size, how you operate, and then you get a custom and automatic tailored solution for that, which you can then refine and edit and bring that into Waybook to essentially lay the groundwork for what you need to do. So just heading back into this document, let me show you exactly what that looks like. Let's pretend none of this exists. I'm going to create a new category, and I'm going to call that library, because that is that's essentially what we every Waybook account has. Now, if I go into the templates, I can either create a document from a template, or I can create a structure template. Of course, on the structure webinar, we're going to go into structure. Now, instantly, you'll be able to see all of the core business types. And actually, if we click on any of those, we have pre-made templates of the most fundamental documents and subjects that you need for the accounting firm, the vet practice, the real estate, the legal practice, the group practice. But what I would recommend in order to utilize the AI, if you click over into Waybook AI, we can now literally describe the business in as much detail as possible. So if anyone can just put in the chat what their business is, so any kind of high level, is it a legal practice, is it you know, a medical practice, whatever that may be, and failing that, I'm going to go with a medical practice, because I know we've got Omid on the call here. So let's say okay, sales training firm. Thanks, Mark. Okay, so let's say we want to write a playbook for a sales training company. Let's say focusing on training sales people within enterprise companies. Now, Mark, I know that you train people across all different types of businesses, but we can just add as much content and as much detail into that as possible. So we can actually decide on, say, how many people they are, what form of training we do. Now, instantly, we'll start to build the structure out. So we've got the specific elements of the sales training program, our methodologies, our performance metrics, our role-playing exercises. We've got the key sales techniques that we do, our client engagement, our sales tools and resources, how we do leadership, documentation and compliance. Now, all of that is excellent, but let's say, for example, Mark wants to have documentation around his marketing. So let's say add in a marketing handbook. So you can literally have a back and forth with Waybook here and give more context to your information and make sure that actually Waybook's continuing able to build out your the best structure for you. So we've got a marketing handbook. Yeah, how we do target market analysis. Now we can of course tick, untick, choose what we want to add into our Waybook, and then we can very easily just create that all into our left-hand side. And that is essentially the instant way of building out your playbook with your structure within Waybook. Now, of course, we can then assign these to different people. We can delete, we can move, we can do whatever we want. But this is essentially a very quick and easy way in order for you to create that initial structure for you to then continue to build. Now, that's all well and good when we're getting started. But of course, once you've got a structure, it's really important for you to maintain that structural integrity. So you actually make sure you're adding the right documents into the right place to have access for the correct people. Now, you can utilize the Waybook AI Document Suggestor. And this essentially is a very simple way of you maintaining the organization and clarity across the business. So if you've ever sat there in your Google Drive or your SharePoint and you're thinking, I'm pretty sure that document exists, or if it doesn't, I don't quite know where to put it. Instead of spending time thinking about it, you can literally just tell Waybook what you want. It will look at all of the knowledge within your Waybook, where it should go, and it will actually suggest the most relevant information adhering to your existing structure. So finally, I'm just going to jump back into the Waybook now here. And let's say, for example, we want to add in a document on the BANT sales process. So I'm going to just click on the AI Document Suggest, again, in edit mode and at the bottom here. And I'll say, create a document on the BANT sales approach. Now, again, what Waybook's doing here is it's looking at that, it's understanding the most relevant place to put it. And you'll see here, it's decided to put it into the sales handbook. If we want to see the knowledge that lives around that, you can show existing and say, oh, of course, that makes sense. It's in sales and marketing. It's in the sales handbook. Now, if you think about how powerful this is, obviously you're not going to be the only person that adds to your Waybook for the long term. So if you encourage your team to utilize the document suggest, it will ensure that everybody's always putting things in the most logical way, so you don't end up with duplicate content or lost information. Now, if I add this document, one thing that's excellent about this is because the AI has understood what I'm looking for, you'll see that if I go into here, although it's an empty document, heading into the settings, you'll see that it's already created a brief description of that. So if I then go to create that document, it will already be pre-prompting the Waybook AI to start to build out the fundamental structure of that document. So that whole process of creating the core piece of knowledge and information is extremely easy for you and your team. So these are the two starting points that just give you a massively unfair advantage, both the Waybook Structure Builder and also the Waybook Document Suggest. Now, let's dive into a few more of the big specifics when we're getting started, and a few of the top tips that we think are really important to remember when we're looking at your Waybook structure. So rule number one is to avoid duplicate knowledge at all times. If you have a piece of knowledge or documentation that lives within your sales handbook, but it's also kind of relevant for your marketing team, really avoid the temptation to duplicate the knowledge and put it in a different section. Remember, your groups and your permission structure should do all of that heavy lifting for you. Because as soon as you have two versions of the same or similar information, people will start to lose trust in the information that you have scattered across the organization. You want your Waybook and the documents to be the single source of truth. So make sure that you have a document that you can then share with other people, depending on their different roles and access. Now, sometimes you will have a similar piece of knowledge or documentation that actually should be slightly different for two teams. So say, for example, we have a manufacturing process and there's two parts of that manufacturing team that should see the prefabrication and the post-fabrication of, let's say, some steelwork. Now, in that scenario, what we would recommend is you create the document of manufacturing of steelwork. And if you want to only show the different pieces of information to the different team members, then you can create a second document on prefabrication and a third document on post-fabrication, and just make sure that the right people can see that information within your permissions. So rule number one, avoid that duplication at all costs. Now, a simple one, but it really does make a big impact, is ensure that your subject and your document names are specific and unambiguous. Now, this isn't necessarily to enable the Waybook search. If you've had an experience with Waybook search, you'll know that it's incredibly intelligent. The search will know any spelling mistakes you're making. It will look at the specific information within your document, not just the titles or the headings. But the reason why this is really useful is because just from a visual view, your team will be able to say, sales and accountings, tools and collateral, perfect. But to optimize that, you might have sales tools and sales collateral. So that's really useful for people just to be able to visually see where they are. We see about 70% of Waybook access comes from search, but still 30% of people accessing documentation are looking on that left-hand navigation and understanding where the knowledge lives with other people. The second major benefit of having very specific document and subject names is when you're utilizing the reporting section and seeing who has seen what they understand, when they've last viewed it. Just from that snapshot, you don't just know that it's the tools, you know that it's the sales tools document that you can really ensure that people understand. Now, this is something that is something that you are likely going to be adopting. If you're on this call, you're probably one of the people responsible for creating the structure. But we find it really important to clearly delegate the ownership of your structure and of your subjects. So typically, dependent on the size of your organization, you kind of want a close-knit group of people who are in control of your subject, because people might have there's no one perfect way of creating what level of documents and subjects that you should have. So you almost want a close-knit of people that will say, okay, we are separating this by department and by these 4 clusters that run across the organization. So if you have the right level of access and control, which would ultimately be an admin or a manager on your Waybook group, then you can delegate the ownership of specific areas of knowledge to that department head. So the marketing handbook would be owned by your marketing lead, or the sales handbook owned by your sales lead. Now, when people create documents within their Waybook, and particularly when you're using your AI optimizer, people will see lots of inspirational documents that they think, of course we should have this in. I recently this week spoke to a big chain of plumbers here in the UK, and as we were creating out their documentation, there were processes like asking for permission to take photos, or taking photos on a job site, and how they ask for permission. Now, he said, oh, I'd never even thought about having that document within there, but of course I should have that document. And you'll find, utilizing the AI, you have a lot of inspiration and you have a lot of ideas of documentation that you create. But a trap that a lot of people fall into is ending up with hundreds of documents that ultimately end up as their to-do list of documents. And sometimes that can create a lot of clutter for you as an editor in the left-hand side. So the key thing here is, do not be afraid to delete documents. You've seen how easily Waybook can create document suggests and put it in the right place. So if it's not right for you now or in the next few months, just delete it out of your account. And you can also utilize the archive feature within Waybook. So if I go into this information here, if you have a lead generation process, then ultimately you want to be updating that and doing the next version of that document. If you're currently not doing any form of lead generation, then you can literally just either put that into a draft, or you can just archive that document, and that will then take that out of your Waybook, but the document isn't deleted. So the next time you come to say, well, we're going to start doing lead generation again, you can simply click on this eye icon, and you can decide to actually also look at your archive documents and then say, oh, we did have that previous process. Let me jump into that. Let me unarchive the document, and you bring that back into the knowledge of the organization. So the key point here is, don't become overwhelmed by having lots and lots of documents that are your to-do. Use delete, use archive, and then you can regenerate that using best practice with Waybook AI or the knowledge you have about your business. And then the final thing to mention, and I've covered this already, is that the permissions are mostly set on the subject, but you can also set those permissions on an individual document basis as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have now, in 33 minutes, gone through the very high level building blocks of Waybook down to the specific ways and approach of creating your structure. I'm just going to pause here for a moment to ask if anybody has any thoughts or questions. Please feel free to use the chat. Omid, you've said, can I see archive subjects? Can you archive tabs? I'm not 100% sure on what you mean but by tabs there. If you mean the top level subjects, you can't archive a subject, but you can archive those individual documents. So typically what people would do, if you're archiving a whole subsection, then what you can do is either archive everything within it and leave that subject there, or you can even move it into a separate subject of archived, or whatever naming function you want, and just have all of those documents archived. In order to see that, once again, you can just click on that that eye icon, and you'll also notice that you can customize what you can see. So if we don't want to see archive, we also actually don't want to see our published or our templates. We only want to see our draft documents, and here we can see what are those specific draft documents, and these are the to-dos that we have. The other key way that you can manipulate the view of this content on the left-hand side, and if I just reset that back, is if you use the bookmark function, which in my opinion is a great way for you to be able to get quick access to the knowledge and content that you need. You can then just bookmark a document there. That will obviously put that onto your individual dashboard, but you can also then look at your left-hand structure by only your bookmark documents. So we can say, okay, cool, I'm just going to look at bookmark. That's the one. It's lead generation. These are the 3, 4, 5 documents that I regularly come across. So thank you very much for that question there, Omid. Right, I'm just heading over to Mark's question here. So you manage sales tools, presentations on SharePoint, and manage designed customer collateral brochures, case studies in HubSpot. How can you interact with those documents so you only manage in one place? So that's a great question, Mark. It really depends in terms of why that knowledge lives in that particular area. So you can, of course, most people will end up bringing all of the kind of written, the video, the text, the information, which is for your internal knowledge natively within Waybook. So all of your, let's say the videos as part of your onboarding or your training, you can actually have that natively within Waybook. And the reason why people do that is because it's way more effective for a search and an ask perspective, not just on Waybook, but also utilizing the search browser the browser extensions or the mobile apps or whatever that may be. Now, if you have knowledge that needs to live in different locations, which I suspect is likely for you, Mark, if you've got specific PowerPoints that your trainers utilize on site in the training material, or of course you've got those brochures that live within HubSpot, the best way to do that is actually you can then either embed or integrate that content specifically. So for the sake of having SharePoint or perhaps Google Drive slides, we can jump into here and I can either click on this link here, click on the plus and choose the option, or if you're a Waybook ninja, you can do the slash and do a web embed. And we can actually paste that embed code from your SharePoint, from your Google Drive, or whatever that may be. And it will natively show that slide deck, that brochure, that PDF, whatever you want within your Waybook. So if you want to show that in there, that's a great way to do that. The other thing that you can do, particularly on the case studies or brochures within your HubSpot, you might have within a procedure, this is how we do our sales follow-up, and you have your brochures. So you might actually have the attached or the embedded brochure itself. And then when you're actually showing how people execute or start that sequence, you can actually have a link in here which goes to your HubSpot sequence or goes to that piece of material directly within HubSpot. And of course, we can just select some text and then we can actually click on the link icon and do a direct URL link into that. So I hope that answers your question there, Mark. If not, please feel free to jump back in. Awesome, thank you very much. Right, David, your question. So you've got multiple location with 80% of steps and documentation applying to all locations. For the 20% of content that is location specific, is it better to separate that into separate documents, or are there better ways to localize information by location so managing data doesn't overwhelm the editors? That is a great question, David. So what we typically see, and I'm so sorry, David, could you just remind me of your business type? Are you I can't quite remember if you're medical or what your business are. Education, of course, yeah. So if you've got your different locations, you might essentially have your, let's say, your operations playbook. So what I would personally do, I would create and I'll actually do it here with you. So I would create a category, let's say operations. Within that operations, I will have a subject, which is core operations, or you can name it however you want. Now that core operations will have all of your core things. So that might be opening times, let's say your reception procedures, whatever that may be. Now within that, you might then want to localize that, and I would do that on a new subject. So you can essentially have a subject which is location A. And in location A, you might then have, let's say, lockup procedures. And whatever that may be. My spelling has failed me. Procedure. So you might actually create your lockup procedure. You might actually create all your different elements. So when you're giving somebody access, what you're ultimately doing is for the operations, I'll jump in to show you specifically. We can say operations. Title here. So what we'll ultimately do is we'll give that person access to their operation, so those core operations, and then you will have a separate group which is location A. So location A, let me go into here. Location A may then only have access, of course, to the location A. And because you can have multiple groups that overlap together, you essentially then know that everybody has the core information, and then the individual locations only have the things that are relevant to them. The other way you can do that is you can do it by another group, which is operations location A, if you wanted to have sales location A, whatever that may be. The final top tip on that I would do is when you're creating the localized documentation, instead of starting with location A, I normally like to start with location template. So what I'm essentially doing here is I'm creating what are all of the pieces of information that need to be localized. We've got our lockup procedure, we've got our fire safety, we've got our kind of enrollment process. And essentially, once you've created all of those documents, we say, okay, that's cool. Let me say what the general lockup procedure is. And then all you do is when you're looking to customize that, we then duplicate that whole location. And then we say, okay, now this is location A. And the work you need to do is just a small amendment on here, a small amendment on here, a small amendment on here. And that essentially means that you're really making it much easier for you to location that. And of course, you will likely share the ownership to that head of that location. But again, avoiding duplicate content. If there's anything that runs across your procedures, have that in your centralized information. Okay, cool. That is great. And just one final thing on that, David, and of course everybody else. If you've got something that runs across, so let's say we've got lead generation, and this lead generation actually is a piece of documentation that we know people are going to be using a lot. Let's say it's a security procedure. Every time we're going to be doing it. Yes, you can duplicate and you can create it in a different place. But you can actually also head into the settings of that document. You can turn that into a template itself. So if I actually convert that document into a template, I will do that here. And then that basically means next time I go into our templates and I go into document template here, you'll see that you have that lead generation as an actual template within your template library. So no matter who else is creating that document in the future, they don't need to copy and paste. They don't even need to have the permissions. Everybody sees it within the template library and you say, oh, of course, I can just amend this and go from there. So it's another great way of keeping your structure clean, but making sure you have that consistency of generating that information. Okay, thank you so much for your fantastic questions there. I'm keeping my eyes on the chat if we do have any other thoughts or questions. So now is your time. But failing that, let me just move on to the final part of today's session. And that's really just to bring us to the point of how we can now build the operations backbone. The key thing here is that your team really does deserve the fact that your knowledge base, your single source of truth is fast, is reliable, and is built around them. And really, we're not just building the tool here for Waybook, but if we can create that knowledge-centric culture, that your team actually know that they can contribute, they can feedback, they can add, they can edit, they can do different things. As soon as you make that slight culture shift, you really tend to find that people do adopt this concept of taking pride in how they do the work, not just the work that they're doing. And really, that just makes you as a business owner or an operator a total superpower of having the team organized, having it scalable, having the knowledge searchable, and making sure that people trust what they're learning as well. So if you're now ready to turn all of that into action, the key thing that I would recommend is to just finalize your top level structure. What are the kind of 5 subjects, the core areas of knowledge across the business? And then for each one of them, what are the documents that you want? Just pick 3 or 5 documents. The key thing I'd recommend here is if you're not using the AI and you're thinking about what you want to do, try not to start with what I would call the boring documents. A lot of people will bring in the boring documents because they already have it available. Now I'm talking policies or the guidelines on how to be a good employee rather than how to do their work effectively. Because you tend to find that if people come into Waybook and all they can see is the harassment policy and the conduct policy at work, yes, it's useful and it's centralized and it's searchable, but it's not making their day-to-day easier. So if you think about what are the main questions people have, what are the main things that they need to, that they're spending that 20% of the time getting access to, and we ultimately put that into the core piece of knowledge. As soon as they ask a question on Waybook and they get an instant answer, that's where the magic really starts to happen. And that's where the knowledge-centric culture emerges from. And of course, make sure you invite your team, collaborate with other people, use the feedback, use the chat function to bring it in. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of today's session. I'd like to thank you all so much for joining, and of course, for everybody who's contributed in the chat and the Q&A as well. As I mentioned, this is the 7th of our 8th Masterclass series. We're really excited to complete the set by creating out content best practice, which will be coming to you next Friday. And if you've got any other thoughts or questions in the meantime, please do get in touch with your account manager or, of course, the customer success team. We truly want to stay as close to you as possible to make sure that you get your business on the same page in the most efficient way so we can all enjoy some smooth scaling. And until next time, I hope you all have an amazing one, and I look forward to seeing you then. Take care. Ahmed, you've got your question there just in terms of are there recording of previous masterclasses? There are recordings of most of them. I know Elle in the background there will definitely make sure that we get a link over to you for the rest of the masterclasses which we have available. Amazing. Thank you so much. See you later and have a great weekend.